What would Richard's mother have said to him? Thou camest on earth to make the earth my hell. A grievous burden was thy birth to me. Tetchy and wayward was thy infancy. Thy school days frightful, desperate, wild and furious. Thy prime of manhood daring, bold and venturous. Thy age confirmed, proud, subdued, bloody. More mild, but yet more harmful, kind in hatred. What comfortable hour canst thou name that ever graced me in thy company?
That's so unfair. Welcome to this special 10th episode of Mr Keet on location. Today we're going to be exploring the vicious, pernicious and brutal character of King Richard III and how he murdered the princes in the Tower. We're going to be going over to the Tower of London and... Wait a minute. Hello? Yeah, it's Mr Keet here. What? Dropped from the show? What do you mean dropped from the show? I've got nearly 100 subscribers now. I've got quite a lot of likes, quite a lot of comments too. What? Mr Hibbert, who's that? Well, I'm just about to go over to the Tower of London now. It's just over there, you see. He's already there. What? So what am I going to do then? Oh. Welcome to Mr Hibbert on location. Now, Mr Keet has already given you an incredibly damning picture of Richard's intentions, and he will tell you that what Richard did was he murdered the princes in the tower behind me.
Let's look at why two young children were in the Tower of London in the first place. In the year 1483, England was faced with a crisis. Edward IV, the king who had reigned victorious at the end of the Wars of the Roses, had suddenly fallen ill and died. He had sons, but the eldest, also called Edward, was only 12 years old, too young to be an effective and powerful ruler. As such, the ground was ripe for the king's extended family and advisors to increase their own influence over the young heir. Richard, the king's brother and loyal follower, stepped in as Lord Protector. His aim, to ensure the stability of England. For their own safety, Richard moved the boys to the Tower of London, which is a safe and secure place where kings traditionally awaited their coronation. However, in the summer of 1483, the two boys, the only heirs to the English throne, disappeared.
What we have to consider is this is part of the bloody world of the Wars of the Roses, and Richard was really fearful of a coup by Edward's wife, Queen Elizabeth. Also, far from being a bloody murder dungeon, the Tower of London at this point was a beautiful palace that the princes could be brought to in order to prepare for their coronation.
Indeed, Richard had little reason to kill the princes in the Tower. He was already an experienced ruler and already had served King Edward loyally for many years. Up in York, he had been serving as Lord President of the Council of the North, which was a body set up by Edward IV to better govern the northern regions of England. Here, he had fought frequently with Scotland, extending England's power over the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, which had previously been lost to the Scots. Now, with Edward's sudden death, he had moved to London to fulfil his role of Lord Protector. On his way, however, he sensed a coup that was led by Anthony Woodville, brother of the Queen of England, Edward's widow. Acting quickly, he had Anthony arrested and informed Edward's young son about the plot against him.
Can't believe that Mr Hibbert's taken over my show after having nearly 100 subscribers and lots of likes. What a tragedy. However, I bet he's sharing that Richard III was such a nice guy, such a kind and gentle soul. What a liar. The Queen, who survived Edward IV, arranged for her brother to carefully and considerately take the heir to the throne, Prince Edward, down to London so that he would be secure and have a safe and peaceful coronation. However, on his journey there at a place called Stony Stratford, Richard III ambushed Anthony, had him arrested, tried him for treason and had him brutally executed when he arrived in London. What a terrible person he was.
Richard was hardly trusted by the king during his time in the Council of the North. In the 1470s, King Edward carefully restricted Richard's influence in the council through the use of his own agent, Sir William Parr. When Edward had died, Richard was quick to place his own nephew at the head of this organisation, tying all of its actions to that of the royal palace, which, by that time, Richard himself controlled.
There you are. What Mr Hibbert probably hasn't told you as well is that in the summer of 1483, Richard showed his thirst for power by writing to his friends and supporters in York, where he had been the head of the council up in the north. What he did was he asked for his supporters to oppose the Queen, her blood adherents and her friends. And in the summer of 1483 he had them rounded up in the Tower of London. Again he accused them of treason, he had them led outside and there they were executed. Surely he could have done the same to the two princes who were now locked up in that very same tower in London.
An account written by Thomas More, after Richard's death, indeed speaks of Richard as a cunning and conniving figure. He was malicious, More writes, wrathful, envious, close and secret, a deep dissembler. Richard's personality, clearly displayed in More's account, together with his strong motive and royal ambition, clearly mark Richard as the instigator of this cold and bloody murder in the Tower of London.
But earlier in 1483, Richard had been told by a clergyman that the heir to the throne was illegitimate and was in fact a bastard child, the result of a union between old King Edward and a lady called Eleanor Butler. As such, Richard was acting decisively to ensure the future security of the country.
The evidence accusing Richard of murder originates from the period following his death. In 1485, Richard was killed while fighting valiantly on Bosworth Field. He was defending his regime from another pretender to the throne, Henry Tudor. Having slain Richard, Henry was now Henry VII, the first Tudor King of England. Newly in power, Henry sought to undermine Richard's reputation as king. Thomas More, one of Henry's trusted civil servants, wrote a history of Richard's rule, denouncing him as a crazed and deformed ruler. It is from this account that another famous author, William Shakespeare, built his image of Richard III. This dark and shadowy interpretation of Richard is the one that sadly persists to this day. Sources contemporary with Richard, however, suggest that he was a kind and generous man. Archibald Whitelaw, for example, a venerable and respected Scottish clergyman, visited Richard in 1484, reporting that never has so much spirit or greater virtue reigned in such a small body. Similarly, an account by a German ambassador, Nicholas von Poppelau, describes Richard as remarkable for his courteous behaviour and great heart.
Now, where is he? Right, well, there is some evidence to say that Richard III was a nice guy, but in fact that is skewed as well, because most of it is written by people, by diplomats who wanted to impress Richard, either from Scotland or from Germany. In fact, Archibald Whitelaw had come to Richard's court to try and make sure that he had a good relationship with him. No wonder he was praising him and saying that the man wasn't a murderer. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that Richard had already had the taste of power up in York, and now he was coming down to London to make sure he firmly established his claim to the throne by murdering the only heirs in existence.
Now, I better find Mr Hibbert before he does his final concluding statement.
Far from being the murderous tyrant as presented by Shakespeare and Tudor propaganda, Richard III is actually one of the great examples of the idea of history being written by the victors. He was a ruler who sought the stability of England above all else and was a truly intelligent and interesting historical figure. And he deserves to be remembered much more sympathetically than he is.
That's a nice summary, Mr Hibbert, but I can get you on the final voiceover because I'm editing the video. The problem remains that no one knows where the Princes of the Tower went to. In 1674, workmen in the tower dug up a wooden box that had inside it the remains of two small skeletons. The bones were reburied in Westminster Abbey, but have never been formally identified as the two princes. As for Richard himself, he was carried from the battlefield at Bosworth and given a hurried burial in the monastery in Leicester, which, 500 years later, became the car park for the local Tesco's. In 2013, he was found and identified with a DNA match with descendants of the monarch's family. Finally, in 2015, he was laid to rest again, this time in Leicester Cathedral. What cannot be laid to rest, however, is his reputation. Was Richard III a cold-blooded child killer, in which case you support Mr Keet and you should subscribe here? Or was he an effective ruler in a time of crisis, his character later slandered by Tudor propaganda? Make your choice and post your comments below.
Mr Hibbert, I just found some fantastic new evidence that brings to light that Richard III was in fact innocent.
Oh, really?
Come with me. This way, here's the evidence. He's innocent, this way.
I don't see any evidence here.